right, a false start today. So welcome everyone. This is a very exciting webinar for us because this is a first webinar around our new series on coaching. And we're going to do 5 in this series. The first one, we're just going to talk a little bit about the difference between coaching versus managing. We're going to get into the Oscar model, which is the coaching model that we use here at TidalShift on our next webinar. We're going to look at some of the other nuances, such as the transfer of accountability from the PM out to the team members, which is really a core around coaching model. But here's the really exciting part. We're going to actually finish up this webinar series with a live coaching session. So that what we'll do is we will make sure that we're going to apply what we're looking at doing here and be able to practice that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. As always, logistics today, your host, myself, David Donaldson. Glad to have you guys all back, and I see more people are logging in as we get started, so I'm very happy about that. Sound and technology, we do everything over the web. I find sometimes there are some technical issues. Usually they tend to resolve themselves fairly quickly, but we've got Scott Roberts supporting us with this, so if there's any issues, pop into the chat, send Scott an email. And as always, we record these sessions so that you can always pick it up later. We also have our ability to raise your hand at the top. So you see a little icon at the top. You can drop that down. You can raise your hand, put in some comments in there. For typing, we've got the chat box. We'll have that throughout our day today. And of course, as always, we accept applause. Okay, so let's go with our opening thought today. Now, our last webinar series, we looked at some books, and one of the books we looked at was a new book by Vijay Verma, The Art of Positive Politics, and we looked at a key element out of that book, which was his 3 truths, and one of those truths was people make or break things. And when we put this into a context of managing projects, it's very important to realize, recognize, and be aware that it's people who make the things that projects create and deliver, and it's also people who break those things. So when we're managing projects, as much as we have timelines and we have scope and we have all these wonderful things, let's never forget that we're working with people. And what we want to do is make sure, sorry, it's getting a little bit of background noise here, which is odd. We want to make sure that we are working with those folks so that they are contributing to the project, that they're making the thing and not breaking the thing. So that's our opening thought for today. Now I'm going to throw open a question for you. We'll do our first question of the day. And what is your biggest challenge when it comes to managing people on a project? So I've opened up the question box down the bottom there. Just pop into that bottom section there and type in, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to managing people? Right, we got lots of people chiming in today. This is fantastic. So from Debbie, competing priorities. Absolutely. Now, Debbie, if you would expand on that for me for a moment. I think I know where you're going with that, but if you could just pop in again for me and just do a quick bit of clarification, I'd appreciate that. When you talk about competing priorities, what separate priorities are you talking about? From Reg, clarity of communications and expectations. Love it. Thank you, Reg. We talk about communication a lot in project management, and arguably 80–90% of what we do as project managers is communicate. So we need to be very clear on that, and it's so easy to miscommunicate. I always, kind of ask that question, how many people does it take to play broken telephone? That kids game where you whisper something to someone and they whisper to the next person, and we get something very funny and wrong on the other end. 2 people, absolutely. And those expectations, we often have some hidden expectations. From Debbie, interests, maintaining that interest. From Marie, communication errors leading to duplication of efforts. Oh, love that one, absolutely. And leading to that issue of meeting those timelines. So the communication errors, not only just the clarity of that communication, as Reg said, but, leading to those, outcome factors. From Debbie, task completion. I popped in one of mine, people not doing what I say when I say it, because I'm the manager here of this project, so gall darn it, they should be doing what I say. When people are supporting projects off the side of their desks and they have multiple other things to account for. That's what I thought you were going with, Debbie. Thank you for that clarification. We're often doing projects off the side of our desk. We're keeping our day job. We're trying to get this job done. We're trying to get multiple things done at once. And of course, there's that great challenge of keeping all of the balls in the air, keeping all of the everything in concert going. And then finally from Reg, and not just from the PM, but to the PM. Oh, absolutely, yes. Because there's communication from the PM out to the team, out to other stakeholders, but there's also communication from those other stakeholders to the PM. And this is where I'm a huge fan of when you're doing things like your scoping and your resolving elements. Let's get the folks talking directly to each other. Right? Yes, we need to understand what's going on, but how about if we get the client talking directly to the developer, the designer, the architect talking directly to the builders, this sort of thing. So some fantastic comments there. Thank you guys. Okay, now our topic today is coaching. And we have a coaching practice here at TidalShift. It's headed up by Catherine Daw. So Catherine is our special guest for today. So Catherine is on the line, and she's going to be appearing in mere moments, I hope, if all of our technology works. So just to give you a quick bit of background, Catherine is the original founder of TidalShift when we started all those 20-odd years ago. And she's also a certified coach and heads up our coaching practice. So Catherine, welcome. There we go. Give that another try. I've unmuted you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. There we are. Yay. We can hear you now. So Catherine and I have worked together for about the past 8 years. And more recently, Catherine's gotten her coaching certificate and is, as I said, heading up our coaching practice. But a very experienced, great resource from the consulting side and taking all of that, working with companies and projects, and then rounding that out with the whole coaching piece. So welcome, Catherine. Excellent. Well, we're so glad you can make the time today. Now, we started off our day today by posing a question to our team. And this is a question that I'm going to pose to Catherine. But just before we pose it to Catherine and hear her angle on this, I want to pose this back to the team and ask you, what do you think the difference between managing and coaching is? Pop in the bottom there. What do you think the difference between managing and coaching is? I just realized I was on. So Catherine's dog is chiming in as well. I guess we need to teach him how to type. So for Marie, coaching encourages me to find my best way as opposed to telling me. Reg, we manage the operational objectives, the current skill set versus understanding and building those. For Markham, how to communicate. So managing someone already know versus coaching someone not know and developing those skills. Okay, that makes sense. Love it. From Nav, coaching is more engaging rather than managing is more directive. So it's about telling people versus engaging them. I like that. As a metaphor, coaching like teaching a person to fish rather than giving them fish. Oh, that's such a beautiful analogy, Christine. And then from Sandra, managing is more directive, task-oriented. Coaching is building those skills. So, Catherine, I'm going to get you to chime in as we see a few more of these coming in. What are you thinking about these responses?
They're very much in line with my thinking around the difference between the manager's perspective and what I call the coaching mindset. So, coaching is really about helping people, team members, or individuals develop their own solution, for example. I also like to call it leading from behind. So if we ask questions or create solutions and strategies through those, then we have a much better chance of empowering them, the people that we're working with, and to develop a sense that they've got their own contribution at hand, rather than a manager's perspective, which would step out in front of the team and come up with the solutions and strategies. So I like what I'm hearing from everybody on the call here.
Yeah, I think we've got a very savvy group today, and I've been noticing over the couple of years we've been doing these sessions, we seem to get a more and more people are really getting much more savvy about how to manage the projects more effectively, and really, getting on top of that, whole coaching versus managing piece. So what I'm hearing is that, the real difference here is that managing is to that timeline, it's that technical, I'm on time, I'm on budget, versus coaching is really more about building your people and working from the human end of things. But not only that, is that we're ending up with not only the product at the end of the day, but also a more enhanced team. Okay.
Mhm. I would really agree with that, David, because I think the key is that that's what we're looking for is productivity and how can we get the job done
So when we look at the
most effectively.
similarities, we're still in charge. It's still a conversation. We're still getting that job done, as you say. The difference is, and we're hearing this both from you, Catherine, as well as from our team out there, it's not about telling them what to do. So it's not, hey, do this, do this, do this. Much more of that two-way communication piece, the team taking that ownership, much more of a collaborative approach. And one of the big things that was a big aha for me when I first started getting into the whole coaching versus managing conversation is that whole piece around we're actually developing the team as we get the job done, which can be a really huge, important piece. So thanks everyone for chiming in on that. So the next question that I want to pose, and I'm going to kind of play a little bit of a almost devil's advocate on this one. Okay, yeah, I'm running a project. It's got a tight timeline. I don't have time for this touchy-feely mumbo-jumbo. So, Catherine, what's your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure you've heard that response a few times.
hmm Yeah, so generally what I've experienced is that if we and this is even from days back when I was managing projects and that sort of thing. If someone came to me and they had a problem and I didn't have the time, I would just give them the quick solution and they'd walk away and they try to implement it, but it's not their solution, it's mine. And so they'd typically be back and then we would try it again and they would try something different and then they'd be back. So it became this endless loop of time. Whereas if we had actually taken the time to spend with them and have them participate in it, then we're actually doing a better job of having them own it and them coming up with the solution. What I call being resourceful. They have what they need. So I don't think it's about touchy-feely. It's more about focusing on that task at hand and really
Right, so
paying
really trying to
attention.
find
That's what
that
brought us
blend of getting the
together.
job done while developing the team. It's interesting you use the example of, you tell them how to go do it and then they come back again, which brings us to our poll. And I'm going to open up the poll for the team here, for the audience on our webinar. And I want to ask the simple question, what do you think is how will using a coaching approach impact the timeline of your project? Do you think it's going to make it longer? Do you think it's going to make it shorter? Do you think there's going to be no difference? Okay, we're getting lots of good votes in here. We'll give it a few more moments. Okay, so we've got about 40 people on the call today, so we're a little bit over half, so I'll give a few more moments before we end the poll. All right, 3, 2, 1. We're going to end the poll now. Let's broadcast those results. And I think these results really reflect on the level of people we have on the call today. 11% are saying it's going to make it longer, 64% are saying it's going to make it shorter, and 24% is going to make no difference. So when we look at those results and we think about that, it's, there is an investment here. When we look at, using a coaching approach on a project, there is an investment. However, I think that in the short term, that investment, while we're going to have to put in, and on some projects, it may in fact take a little bit longer to use this coaching approach. In that larger term, you're going to end up with a shorter timeline. What are your thoughts on this, Catherine?
Well, actually, like it's interesting because I might have given it away saying that it would be shorter. In some cases, I do think that it sometimes will make no difference because it really depends on the complexity. And sometimes we have the challenge as project managers, especially if we're technical project managers, where we will have some technical know-how that we will have to engage a little bit longer to get them to understand what really might be the issue at hand. That can be done through a coaching approach. But I also
Hmm.
find that sometimes it's a blend. It really becomes that. So I do think overall it can have some real benefits because it does increase the capabilities of your team, and then they're hopefully coming to you less than they would maybe in the past, or at times when they think they can figure it out
Hmm.
and get the job done without interruption. So I do think it sort of ebbs and flows along the path. And as you get to be better at using coaching as part of your management
Absolutely. And I think
style,
Reg summed it
that
up
will
well.
make a
Too many
difference as
variables
well.
for a simple click pick. Because there are many variables. And one of the nice things there is we can use a coaching approach in certain elements of our project and not in others. It's kind of similar conversation when we talk about Agile versus Waterfall. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So there are times when it's going to make sense to pull out the coaching hat and go down that path. There's other times when it's going to make sense to pull out the manager hat and be a little bit more dictating. The things that I've been seeing though from observing and as well as managing projects is coaching produces that greater sense of the agreement, the engagement, the commitment, and the accountability, because people are participating in it more. We think about the three truths from our last session from BJ Verma's book, and he talked about people when they participate, they'll commit to what they build, and it's people who are going to make or break this project. So we really need to be involving them more. And we have that conversation a lot around stakeholders and, engaging our stakeholders better. I think really this is just an extension of that concept. Okay, so our next question. Now, when we start talking about coaching, this term emotional intelligence often comes up. So, Catherine, give us a little bit of insight as to what emotional intelligence is all about.
Well, I would call a lot of it around how self-aware are we? How are we aware of how we are projected or how we project ourselves to others, but also how do we read others as well? So how do we understand, what's going on for them? I also often liken it to an iceberg. There's what we see above the surface is, typically what most of us see, but then there's all that other stuff that goes on below the surface, our beliefs, what's going on for us at home, all the other things that we bring when we come into an interaction with another
Right.
person.
So really about those, what are those underlying emotions? What are some of those underlying pieces that are there? And in some of my research around emotional intelligence, one of the things that I really love is we talk about, well, we can't control our emotions, which is, to a large extent, absolutely, we can't. We have these emotional reactions. We can control what we do with them, on the other hand. So using a very simplified analogy, I'm driving down the road and some guy in some type of car that I'm may have an opinion about pulls in front of me, and I have to slam on the brakes and avoid the collision, and of course I have an emotional reaction to that. Now I have a choice as to what I can do with that. I can back off a little bit, give them some space. I can instigate a road rage incident, and maybe even to an extreme I could rear end them on purpose and cause an accident. But it's really about how we leverage those. And one of the other programs that we do is around resilience, and we've done some webinars on this, where we talk about, let's keep our behaviors in that productive zone instead of going into the unproductive behaviors. So we're in that project and things are going off the rails a bit, instead of sort of panicking and causing trouble. How can I keep those reactions to my emotions under check so that my reaction is much more in that positive sense, and looking for ways to respond, which is going to be more productive and helpful. So it's a big important one. And as we were putting this together, both Catherine and I agreed that this would be a good quote. Um, Speak when angry, and you'll make the best speech you ever regret. And it was Groucho Marx who said this. Now, there's a couple of other people and other versions that have been credited with this, but it's, I don't know about you, but I've been there. I'm sure we've all. I'm getting that smile from that knowing smile from Catherine over there. We've all been in those places where, you know, emotions are up and we're getting angry and we blurt it out and it's like, oh heck, I can't take that one back. Uh-oh, this is not going to be good. So, high emotional intelligence, we have that ability to control what we do with those emotions. Okay. So, yeah.
Well,
Please.
can I just interject there for a minute because I think the other thing on that, and I talked about a little bit in terms of emotional intelligence is also being knowing how we project ourselves and then
Mm.
how others react to us, but also how they project to us and how we react. So one of the key things for me in being a successful coach, whether you're doing it, in a management role or as I do often as an executive coach, is that you have to say that both of you are equals at the table. And if you do that, then you have a much better way of taking the emotion out of it and really dealing with the issues and saying that we're both resourceful. We both have, stuff that we know, and here we are as equals at the table trying to
Nice,
figure out how to
excellent.
solve the problem.
No,
So just wanted to
absolutely, thank you, and
add
that's
that
a
piece.
fantastic way of looking at it because when we have that mutual respect, then it becomes you're more receptive to that input, and you're also more receptive to the criticisms and the feedback. And I know as we go through this series of webinars, we're going to be taking a more closer look at the feedback, which is a great segue into our key skills to be an effective coach. Um, so when we think about coaching, here are some of those key skills. Catherine, would you like to just give us a little bit of pieces around this? Like, what are some of those key skills for being that effective coach?
Sure. Yeah. So the ones that you have up there, listening, asking questions, giving and receiving feedback are a lot of the foundational elements. And we'll be talking in some of the future ones about some of the other pieces, like a good solid process, a way of guiding a conversation and those kinds of things. The issue, though, is from my perspective, is if we look at the person that we're or the people that we're working with to coach and say, well, they're really resourceful. They actually probably have the information, and what we're trying to do is just tease it out. And the way to tease it out is to really ask great questions that are challenging and supportive, and then use the responses that you get from those questions by listening carefully and to listen at what I call level 3 listening, which means we're listening at a deeper level. Typically when we listen at level 1, we have in the background all that white noise that goes on for ourselves personally around, oh, yeah, I know what that is, or oh, I've got some shopping I have to do, make my list in my head as I'm listening. And we're not as present when we're doing that as when we're at that level 3 for deeper understanding and that sort of thing. And so the questions, if you're doing a great job of listening, the questions follow the
Mm.
thread of the conversation as opposed to you interjecting with your solution along the way because either you haven't asked the right question or you've lost your ability, your listening component. And that's where the giving and receiving feedback comes in because we like to use paraphrasing or things like tell me more about that so that I can better understand what you're really trying to explain. So those kinds of things, or I heard you say this, have I got it right? Just so you can do those check-ins with each other. It really has to be much more of a two-way than a one-way. And those are really critical skills. And it allows us to make sure that we're getting to the actions that we really want to, and we can do it effectively when we're, as I said earlier, being
Fantastic,
equals
and
at the table.
I love your description around the level 1, 2, and 3 listening, because so many times we're interacting with someone, we're saying something, and they're just like they're maybe even nodding their head or even as my mom liked to do hum, as she go and meanwhile it's not processing, it's not landing. As you say, we often have that thing playing in our head. One of the biggest ones I find is people often, and I'm guilty of this as well, people often are already composing their response before you finish saying whatever it is you're in the middle of saying. Um, and there's a really great exercise that I got from a friend of mine who teaches improv in the corporate space, and it's called the last word. So here's how it works, and you can try this with your team sometime if you're ever getting into one of those situations where they're not really truly listening. And it's just a quick little 5-minute thing. And what you do is you pair up and you'll say a sentence. And the other person is going to respond, and their sentence they respond with is going to start with the last word of the first sentence. So, for example, if Catherine and I were to do this, I may say to Catherine, um, Christmas is my favorite season. And she would have to then respond with a sentence that starts with the word season. Right? Now, one of the ground rules of this.
So seasons. So seasons.
There we go. So interesting word.
Go ahead,
Absolutely.
sorry.
Words are, and you can use plurals and things to make it work. Words are a very powerful tool. And the point of it is you don't make a coherent conversation because of course you're going to be very hard to do that. But what you'll find is do this for a couple of minutes with a team, and when you debrief them and chat with them afterwards, universally what comes back is, first of all, it's hard work. Second of all is people realize they're now listening to every single word, because as I'm saying my sentence, you don't know which is the word that's going to be the last one. And the other thing that comes out as the third thing is that we often then have to pause before we compose our response. Now, we look at our role models and heroes and people who we emulate after, and very oftentimes those folks appear on TV and movies. Well, they have the advantage of scriptwriters. They have the advantage of editing. They have the advantage of having that witty response given to them. But yet we think we have to behave that way in the real world. So, as I'm in that conversation, having the pause as I compose my thoughts and think about how I'm going to respond, it's almost frowned upon. And especially in today's world, as we're moving faster and faster and faster, I think we're kind of being trained out of the skill of truly listening. And of course, asking questions, good, effective questions. Now we get into the person who's asking the questions composing them well, but also is the person who's being asked, are they actually listening? And the other one around, the whole giving and receiving of feedback, and receiving is so key as a feedback. Catherine, you look like you wanted to add something in there. Nope.
Well, around the asking questions, like listening, and we talked about the level 1, 2, and 3. To me, the questions have different levels as well. You're looking for very high value questions as opposed to low. So high value questions are open-ended for one thing. They're not leading, so it's not like, would you agree? And they aren't questions that might feel intimidating. And one that I would highly recommend that people really work on is, why. So take that one out of your lexicon and start to ask questions like what? What is your challenge? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? So using the what and how are really correct. When do you need to have this done by? And then who else besides yourself is going to be involved in making a decision? Those are questions that are much more inviting. They allow people in. And just as you were talking about the your improv one, I've got another improv one that's kind of like that, and it's about saying yes and instead of yes but. Because when we use but, now we've just erased whatever the person has said in advance of us, and we haven't really listened or considered what they've told us. So if we use things like that, or tell me more, even is a really great way of getting more information, because it means that you haven't got everything that they've said, and now you're asking them to give you more information. So while we need to be asking questions, we need to be asking them in a way that's going to really enrich the conversation and help get to where you're trying to go in terms of solutions and working together collaboratively.
Fantastic. I really love that piece you said around asking questions that are more inviting. So taking the why out of there, because why is a very adversarial thing. So it kind of starts to throw some of those barriers up. And if you're kind of asking me why, I'm getting on the defensive here. I'm thinking, okay, well, why are you asking why, and how are you going to use that? Versus the tell me more about that, or the what are we going to do to deal with this, that sort of thing. Also love the yes but. It now drives me nuts because whenever I'm in a conversation and someone says yes but, the first thing that pops into my head now is you just negated everything I said before that, right? So you can imagine you've just done this big contribution to the conversation, and the person you're talking to says yes but blah blah blah, and it's just there it is, and the yes and it takes a little bit of practice. It does. But I'm finding it really works well to create that more generative conversation that actually grows and builds, as opposed to the more adversarial conversation, which is I'm going to knock down your piece to build up my piece, and then you just get into this contest, which doesn't work well. So I'm going to give us another poll for the team. Now that we've had a chance to take a look at some of the skills and concepts around coaching, as a bit of a primer as we start off this series, I want to just see how much folks are using the coaching style. And I've included in here the yes but didn't realize it, because we may have been using it but not really realizing it now that we've gone through our looking at some of these pieces. We're doing that, or maybe we haven't got to it yet and we'd like to. Let's give it a few more minutes for the poll. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds. Okay. These results are not surprising me at all, based on some of the comments that have come back. Over 50% of our folks on the call today are already using a coaching style. So and I'm kind of seeing that with some of the answers that we're getting. 3.8% are saying no, they're not. Another 34% are saying yes, but they didn't really realize it. So we're looking about 84% of our people on the call today are not using coaching, and then the other 11.5 are saying not yet, but planning to. So I'm actually very encouraged by these results. We're doing really good on time today. So just as we're kind of nearing the end of our session, we're going to finish a little bit early today. So this does prove that coaching style gets our projects done earlier. Catherine, in your experience, having lots of years in managing projects and initially being more of that directive style, managing style, and then transitioning more to a coaching style, what would you say are the biggest benefits and the most surprising benefits to switching to that coaching style?
That's a great question, David. I would say it's broadened the conversation, that we've actually gotten to a better solution. Sometimes one that I would have never thought that could have occurred. And I think there's also just the whole ownership of it. So that when people are included and are taken to own the solution and to help them get to that solution that then they can walk away with. There's so much more that you're doing for them. You're enriching them. You're relieving yourself, if you're a manager, from having to figure out what to do, which frees up your time. And just that whole benefit of the collaborative element of it, I think is so key. Now, I do a lot of coaching where I'm coaching
Hmm.
senior individuals that are trying to learn more about being great leaders. And it certainly still transitions nicely into the conversation we're having around project management, because I do strongly believe that project managers are actually leaders. They're not just managing, because we do spend as project managers over 80% of our time actually dealing with the human side of project management, which is the people and how are they doing. And especially in our environment today, I had the joy in the 90s of having co-located teams that were 100% dedicated to the project, and that is not the realm that most of the people that are probably on this call have even experienced, let alone could enjoy. So it does make a big difference, especially when we are so virtual and when we are tied up with other things. If you're able to really help them get to a better place. And really, to me, the final piece that I want to say around that is that coaching is really about change and taking action. So you coach because you want things to be different, and you coach because you want them to take action on their own. For the person that's being coached or being guided, it's about them starting to own some of it themselves and recognize that they have much more to offer than maybe they even realized. So there's all of that sort of breakthrough experience that they gain from the experience of having someone actually ask them what they're thinking and how would they solve the problem, and
Yeah,
what
get down into the nitty
information do
gritty of
you
it.
give
Couple things I
to
just wanted to
help them make
highlight
the right
of what you
choice and
said,
what the
which really
consequences
resonated
are,
for me, is that whole broadening
the
piece.
actions that
Because
they
now
may
we're
choose
not
along the
only
way.
just building a
So I
product, but we're
do
actually
think
building
there's
a
a lot
team and an
more to it, and
organization.
the richness of it
And
is
something that I
in
think
the
is
practice,
often
which we're going to be getting to
underappreciated
in
is
our
the
sessions as we
need
go
to have
forward.
the
So
team
I
coming
do
out on the
look
other
for
end
that
better
and
than
look
they
forward to
went
that
in.
kind of session.
And like you say, you can get a better solution. I was doing some work with a client, it's in a construction context, and we got into this concept of the, and we'll get to Reg's question in a moment, around the whole leadership and bringing the input of the team in. And he had just finished doing a project where they built two office towers, and the first tower, took them a year and let's say $1 million. I don't remember the exact numbers. And the second project, which was a very similar size, it was almost an identical, twin tower as it were, took half the time and half the money. And the big difference was the PM on the first one was very managerial. He was very dictatorial. It was like, this is what we are doing, and would not accept any input from the team. The second project manager who was engaged to do the second tower, and it was the same team, was very much, as Catherine said, broadening and looking at that better solution, and getting the input from the team and listening to them, and acting much more like a coach than a director. And they cut the project time in half and cut the cost almost in half. One of the biggest factors around that, ironically, was just the use of the crane. You look at any construction site, and you've got this big, very expensive piece of equipment. Um, if at any moment it's underutilized, is costing you money. It's costing you time. And what they did is they had much better cross coordination amongst the team to ensure that that crane stayed operating, as opposed to one team having exclusive use of it for a period of time and then a different team, and so it had downtimes, and so they ended up with a much better solution. The other comment around the virtual teams is very key, because as you say, we're no longer seeing the co-located, everyone in the war room scenarios that we used to. So having that team function as a team is even more critical. I want to get to Reg's question. Any comment on coaches as enablers, as in positively enabler as opposed to that negative enabler, and or the servant leadership piece? So what's your thoughts around that?
Mhm. Right, right. Well, it's great because I'm a big fan of leading from behind. I learned it, I was doing coaching unconsciously for quite a bit of my career, having gone through a coaching certification and building my awareness. I think that that is really a great, that servant leadership style. I read Nelson Mandela's book, Long Walk to Freedom, and that's what he really believes in is that if you treat people as if you are the shepherd, i.e., you're leading from behind, and you let the flock, your team, run forward, and you only step in when there's danger or when there's a need, then you are much more allowing people to get on with doing the work that you know and can encourage them to do. So it's really about allowing there to be different levels of new thinking because as a
Mm-hmm.
leader from behind, we're asking more questions and therefore we're getting to them to think about different ways that they could do it. It's also about eliminating that faulty thinking. As a shepherd, if you think, oh, they're running ahead and they're not going to make that gate, and so you run ahead to guide them to the gate. But if you had actually left them, they'd probably go through the gate on their own anyway, right? So I think it's also about uncovering obstacles or boulders. And so if you lead from behind, you can do that. And those are all enablers that let people
Mm-hmm.
be who they are
Absolutely.
and recognize that they really do have the capabilities.
Excellent.
And
It's
let's
language can
find
be
out
tough.
if we
Absolutely.
can build a really strong
I
team.
love that
But if we don't
sentiment
let
of
them
as
make
leaders we're here to
mistakes or we
serve
don't allow
the
them
team that we're
to test
leading,
the
not the
edges
other
and
way
try
around.
that out,
And I think that's a great segue to
then
kind
we're
of
really
wrap
not
up back
serving
to
them
our
very
opening
well.
thought.
And
It's
as
people who
leaders,
make or
we
break
should be there
things.
to
So as
support people
leaders,
below us
really our job
and
is
working
is
with
more
us.
to enable
I would say
them to
more
get
with
their
than with.
job done, get out of their way and let them do it. And using more of a coaching style is really about that, like you say, that leading from behind, like let me get out of the way and let me enable you so that you can go forward. And if there's an issue or as you say, like a boulder or a barrier in the way, then yes, my job is to step in and remove that as much as possible. But the other question that sort of comes to mind there, and I'm going to pose this as a rhetorical question, is if you have a team member or even an entire team that is not capable of doing the job, why do you have them? So now it becomes a question of if I have someone on my team or an entire team that's not capable of the job, then perhaps I should be assembling a different team. Now, when I say a different team, that can be done in two ways. We can replace the person with someone different, or we can help that person grow so that they become that different person that's going to, fill that role. And of course, in doing so, we're leaving the team in a better state than we started it. When we look at running a project, we're being gifted with or entrusted with the resources of the organization, and how we deal with those resources and how we leverage them is going to be very key. One of the project success criteria is we often talk about project success criteria. People often come back with the on time and on budget, but I challenge that and I say, well, you're on time and you're on budget, but you've just annoyed the entire team and they've left the company. Do you have a success? And people will say, of course, no. So we need to not only get the job done, but we need to emerge with an intact team that's hopefully not only just intact as they were at the beginning of the project, but actually even growth and they've come out better on the other end. And I think when we can do that, we've got real true success in our projects. So this webinar today, so thank you for taking the time. This webinar today was to set that foundation, and I think we've done a nice job of that. So Catherine, I greatly appreciate you taking the time today to walk us through this and to kind of layer that foundation. Our next section, we're going to dig into the Oscar model, which is the model that we use for coaching, and it's a very applicable model when coaching in the project space. And we're going to start to dig into more detail on that and look at some of those other concepts and aspects of it. Just want to put a quick plug out for the International Project Management Day, which is coming up November the 1st. We're going to be hosting an event at the North York Memorial Community Hall on November the 1st. And that link on the register button, by the way, is active. So if you want to hover over that and click on it, just as we wrap up here, I'm just going to leave that up for a few moments. And I just noticed a comment from Ryan. Stop referring to people as resources. I think I know where you're going with that, Ryan. Can you just pop in there and just kind of expand on that for me a little bit, just to make sure we're all on that same page? And while we wait for Ryan to respond, I'm going to leave this page up for anyone who wants to click and register for International PM Day. Catherine, you gave a knowing nod there. What's your thoughts around stop referring to people as resources?
Well, I do think that, it comes back to that human edge that we talk about. We call them human resources. They are actually people, and you're right, Ryan. We should be talking about our team in that way. It's it's a little bit degrading for one thing, and what we're trying to do is work in a more collaborative and inclusive way. So I do think that that really is a critical comment. And certainly, that's why I talk about coming to a management style that assumes that people can already can solve their problem and all they need is guidance, and that we're really there to help them develop through and spread their
Absolutely. So
wings
we
around the
show a
organization
higher
using their
level of
skills and
respect
knowledge that they
for
already have.
the people that
And
we are
that's really
working with,
done
and as
through
you say,
challenging
create that
them
more
and asking
collaborative
great
environment.
questions and
So
being
it's
there to hear
and
them all the way through.
I think the other piece of using
And
the term
so I
resources
do
is
think that we
they're
have to
not
be mindful,
interchangeable. People are all
if I can
very
use that
unique,
word, in terms
and as
of
such,
that
getting the
we are
right
dealing with
person for the
people, not
job
just
is going to be key in helping them
resources.
develop and build. So again, thank you, Catherine, for taking the time today. We'll be sending out the invite for the next one. We'll make sure we double check the link. So apologies to those of you who received the wrong link for this one. Oh, there we go. Chiming in on the end. So again, thank you, Catherine. Thanks everyone for spending the time today. I'll leave the chat box open for a few minutes if anyone has any lingering questions they want to pop in. Our emails are there if you want to fire us a quick note. Otherwise, we'll see you next month.